in Canada for a gathering of centre-left leaders. I'm old enough to remember the ones with Blair, Schroeder, Clinton, the Australian Kevin Rudd, and now you've got Justin Trudeau and the former Finnish leader Sanna Marin, who works for Tony Blair now, and actually Tony Blair himself. Is this getting the third way band back together again?
What it's about is getting sort of progressive leaders across the world together, and that's prime ministers or those that are in opposition at the moment but hope to be in power before too long, to look at common challenges, global challenges. And the theme, we've been here since yesterday, the theme very much here is this sort of axis of insecurity about, global issues, Ukraine, of course, insecurity about economic issues, a big issue back at home in the UK, insecurity about climate, and insecurity about borders, which is something I've been talking about in the last few days, a particular issue in the UK, where I think there's a general sense in the public that the government has lost control of the borders, and that most basic of government features, which is the government ought to be the one that decides who comes to the country, has been lost by this government, and now it's the criminal gangs that are running the vile trade of putting people into small boats across the channel who are deciding who comes to the UK. And I've obviously set out my plans to tackle that, but here we're talking about those issues in a global way, talking about best practice, talking about the different ways we're handling that challenge, and it's a really good opportunity to have those discussions at this level.
Indeed. The polls suggest that you could be Prime Minister within a year, and indeed, like all progressive parties, centre-left parties across the world, you are faced with this particular issue, and it's been a problem for the left. Strikingly, in what you said this week about migration, you said that you would treat people smugglers as though they were terrorists. Let me test this out with you. Would you, for example, treat people smugglers the way we do terrorists and detain them without charge for 28 days?
What I meant by that is that we need to put people smugglers, those that are involved in this vile trade, in the same category as terrorists. And I went, obviously, to The Hague to discuss this with police units, Europol, those that do joint operations across a number of different countries. And what I know from my own experience, Trevor, I was obviously Director of Public Prosecutions between 2008 and 2013. I had staff in The Hague working on these joint operations, and when it came to counter-terrorism, what we were able to do very effectively was to share intelligence in real time, to agree between the lead countries where the investigation would take place, where we would smash in that case, terrorist gangs and bring them to justice. And I believe that if we put international organised immigration crime into that same bracket, we could run the same operation. I'll give you one small example. But we know that we know that the boats that are being used at the moment to cross the channel are being effectively made to order. We know they're being stored in Europe and then brought to the north coast of France. It must be possible, if we get the right operation in place, to smash that operation. And that's what I was discussing when I was over there. And that's what I mean by putting them in the same category as terrorists.
Well, that's clear up to a point. But for 2 decades, one of the outstanding points about the way we deal with terrorism is that we have changed the law in relation to terrorism. And if I can just come back to you, would you, for example, treat people smugglers legally in the same way that we treat terrorists and detain them without charge for 28 days?
Look, I don't think it's the detention powers that are an issue here, Trevor. What I was talking about is the operations. There are other features of terrorist provisions that I would use. Just bear me out on this, because we've had serious crime prevention orders for a long time in place in relation to terrorism and other serious offending. And that allows a court to impose restrictions of movement, to chase money and freeze money of those involved in organised crime. Those orders have never been used to deal with those involved in the vile trade of putting people into the water to cross the channel. And I want them to be used in that way. So this is very much, I'll go back to your previous question, this is very much the Labour Party saying there's a problem here. The government has only given us gimmicks. It's led to a huge problem. Rhetoric and gimmicks, but no solutions.
Let's be clear.
What I'm focusing on is how we're going to actually deal with this.
I do want to be clear whether you mean what you say. Another possibility, which is in legislation, anti-terrorism legislation already, is that someone who knows that an act of people smuggling is about to take place would be subject to Section 38B, requires them to report that to the police or face 5 years in jail, which would apply, if what you say is what you mean, to, for example, the families of children who come across on those boats, who know that they're going to arrive on those boats. Do you actually mean to treat them as terrorists or not?
Well, what I've said, Trevor, is that we need to put them in the bracket of terrorists, and that's what happened. That's why I want it to be used to smash those operations. I think that's very... I mean, I've seen for myself how those operations work in relation to terrorism very, very effectively. At the moment, we don't treat serious organised immigration offences in the same way. Now, a lot of this activity will be taking place in other countries, which is why I needed to go to some of those other countries to see if they're up for this sort of agreement. But frankly, we will never defeat this if all we get every time we suggest something is people saying, well, you can't do that, you can't do this. That is what's led to the problem. And we've got a situation now. I mean, I think what concerns people the most is that basic idea that the government ought to control who comes to this country has been lost under this government. And now it's these gangs that are deciding who should come to the United Kingdom. I'm determined to turn that around.
We get that, but what's clear is that whether or not we are controlling our own borders, we have to tackle this problem in concert with other governments. You've said that yourself. Now, you want to scrap the Rwanda plan that the government's put forward. Is it your belief that you can strike a deal with the EU over returning the illegal migrants who cross the channel to the EU itself?
Well, let me frame the problem, which actually leads to that question. At the moment, what we've got is no control of the borders. So people are coming in, tens of thousands of people coming in across the channel, and the government's rhetoric and gimmicks aren't stopping that. We've got then the gimmick of Rwanda, which has cost in the order of £140 million, and the only person that's gone to Rwanda is the Home Secretary. So that isn't going to work. And we've got barges, which again we've seen the fiasco over the summer. So we've got more and more people coming in.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we know that you think they are not working. I'm asking about your plan.
Yeah, so at the moment what we've got is this situation where there's a growing number of people who don't have their applications processed. That is unsustainable. It's costing £2 billion a year to keep them in hotels. That's not sustainable. So what we've set out, second point, one, smash the gangs in the first place. Second point is process those claims. We set out how we will do that. Then of course, to get to your question, there is the question...
Let me just put this straightforwardly to you. You think that you can strike a deal with the EU. An EU diplomat told the Times this week there is absolutely no question of us helping the UK until we've put our own house in order. Starmer is deluded if he thinks that European governments, who are under much more pressure on asylum and migration than Britain, are going to come to his rescue. They are not going to come to a deal. They have tried for the last 7 years to come to a deal within the EU. Why would you be more successful?
Well, Trevor, obviously, I and everybody else has to answer the question, which is, you stop them coming in the first place where you can by smashing the gangs. You process the claims because it's ridiculous to keep people in limbo at £2 billion a year to the taxpayer. And then the question comes, what do you do with those people whose claims fails, and how do you get them out of the country and return them as quickly as possible? The answer to that, and I'll directly take on your question, is first, you don't need a returns agreement to return people to their country of origin. And if you've got safe countries that they can be returned to, let's say Albania or India, then we can simply get on with that with a fast
come down 90% already.
That's an example of the sort of agreement that can be struck. More of those can be done around the world, so you don't need a formal returns agreement. I'm not going to pretend that a returns agreement with those third countries isn't helpful. Of course it is, and we would seek to strike them. There's then the secondary question, which is, could there somehow be a returns agreement into Europe? Let me be absolutely crystal clear about this, because the government has been pumping out complete garbage this week.
Let's not go back over how terrible the Tories are, because I want to get on to some other issues.
I do think, well, let me just complete on this, because there is obviously an EU quota system for EU members. Well, it's obviously not an EU member, and we will not. No, we will not be part of that. We're not an EU member. This is why what the government's saying has been complete garbage.
All right.
And even that scheme within the EU is not working. I've been discussing that with EU leaders here. That scheme itself isn't really working very well. So the idea that we're going to join the EU scheme on quotas is complete nonsense. We're not an EU member, and that wasn't what I was talking about.
All right. I mean, we could talk forever, but you've given us some limited time, so I do want to get on to a couple of other issues. The other big issue you'll be talking about this weekend is climate change. Gary Smith of the GMB, a big Labour funding union, said this week that we are in danger of reaching net zero by, quote, decimating working class communities because every household, whatever their income, funds the green levy. He's talking about it as a green poll tax. He's right, isn't he?
Well, look, I talk to Gary Smith all of the time, and what he's concerned about, understandably, is the impact that the transition that we need to make in relation to net zero will have on working people. And I share his concerns, but it doesn't mean that I back off from our commitment on net zero. This is where we need global leadership. It's one of the things we're talking about here in Montreal. And I am absolutely committed that an incoming government will get to clean power by 2030. That will lead to lower bills because renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels.
But
it will allow us to get energy. Well, Trevor, just hear me out. It will allow us to have security over energy, so Putin doesn't put his boot on our throat, which we've seen the impact of in the last year or so. It involves the next generation of jobs, but Gary Smith is right. That needs to be a fair transition so that those who are employed in oil and gas at the moment are assured that there will be, many, many years of oil and gas under existing licenses.
And how are you going to make sure that working class people who can't afford electric cars and big new boilers are part of this process and aren't paying the price? That's his point. By
driving down the cost of energy, and there's nobody that quarrels with the idea that if you get to clean power and renewables, the price of energy goes down. And of course, we need to make sure there's not a disproportionate impact on working people. That's a challenge that we can rise to. And it's not straightforward, but I think the wrong response is to simply say, and therefore we'll give up on net zero, we'll give up on the challenge of climate change. That's the position the government's taken, which is throw up its hands, lose global leadership and go backwards.
Quick one on this point. Have you forgiven Sadiq Khan for losing the Uxbridge by-election with his ULEZ charge yet?
Oh, look, I speak to Sadiq Khan all of the time. We had a very productive meeting just last week. We're working together. And again, there's a classic example here. I've got two children, as you know, aged 15 and 12. I don't give them dirty water to drink. I don't want them to breathe in dirty air. So we can't do nothing. But what I don't want is a scheme that disproportionately hits those working people who need to use their cars. I'm talking to Sadiq about that, but this is a grown-up, constructive way forward. But what I'm not going to do is what the government's doing, is simply saying, well, I'm going to go back on that commitment. I don't want dirty air breathed by anyone. We need to find a way to deal with that.
Let's just deal, if I may ask you just one question about the most important question, which is the economy. You've been very clear about your approach to the economy, fiscally responsible, it won't spend money we haven't got. You're going to raise money for specific spending with a windfall tax and all of that. Can you guarantee that you said there's not going to be any rise in income tax, there will be no wealth tax. Can you guarantee that the tax burden, which is scheduled to hit a peak of 37.7% of GDP in 27, won't be higher under a Labour government?
I want the tax burden to come down, particularly on working people. That's been our consistent position. But, Trevor, the difference with me is that I am absolutely laser-focused on growing our economy, because the problem we've had in the last 30 years...
Before you go on to growth, are you saying the tax burden will not come down?
No, I'm saying I want it to come down for working people. That's what I said. But I also am absolutely focused on growing the economy. If the economy in the last 13 years had grown at the same rate as the last Labour government, we'd have tens of billions of pounds to spend on our public services without raising a penny more in tax. And that's where I want that laser focus. And that's why I've said if we are privileged enough to come into power and to serve, we will have a number of missions. The number one mission is getting the highest sustained growth in the G7 and doing it not just in London and the South East, but across the whole of the United Kingdom with a different model of partnership with our businesses.
If I may quickly interrupt you, viewers would not forgive me if I did not put this question to you. The Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, said of you this week, I'm going to play the grab.
I think the Labour leader is Beach Ken. Beach Ken stands for nothing, on shifting sands, in his flip-flops, staring out to sea, doing nothing constructive to stop small boats or grow the economy. And when we examine his weak record on union demands, on border control, on protecting the public and stopping small boats, we discover that, like Beach Ken, he has zero balls.
Now, I'm not going to invite you to prove anything on camera, but would you like to correct the anatomical record?
Look, I just think when a government has completely run out of energy and ideas and the ability to shape or change anything, they go down this rabbit hole of ridiculous insults. It's water off a duck's back to me. I'm clearly setting out, in strong terms, what I'd do about issues like border control, where in the past, Labour has not really wanted to speak. So I speak confidently about the challenges that we face. My focus, unlike Penny Mordaunt's, is on the challenges that we face as a country.
I will pass your message on to the Leader of the House of Commons, see what she makes of it. Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.